Okay, this is just a real quick video on hypothesis errors. Hypothesis errors are things that could go wrong in hypothesis testing. Not things that you've done as a statistician, but things that can go wrong because of bad data. So let's first focus on the types of errors that you can have. So what you've got is you've got basically you're talking about the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And there's two things that are true about that. First of all, there's a true state about the null and alternative. Let me get my pen going here. Either the null hypothesis is true or the alternative hypothesis is true. So that's the true state of the hypotheses. Then you go out and collect some data, and from that data you make a decision. And from that decision you decide that either the null hypothesis is true or the alternative is true. So let's think about what can happen. If you decide that the null hypothesis is true, and actually it's true, you've made a correct decision. Okay? If you decide that the alternative hypothesis is true, and in fact the alternative is true, you've also made a correct decision. So there's two cases where you can be correct when you're doing hypothesis testing. The other two boxes are two things that can go wrong. The first one, you decide that as a statistician, that the alternative is true, when actually the null hypothesis is true. That is called a type 1 error. The second type of error that can be made is that you decide as a statistician that the null hypothesis is true when actually the alternative is true. That is called a type 2 error. So to summarize, therefore, there are two types of errors. One, when you conclude as a statistician that the alternative is true, so it's what you conclude, when really H0 was true or the null was true. The second error, type 2, is when you conclude as a statistician that H0 is true, when really HA is true. So there's two parts to hypothesis errors. One, what you conclude to be true, and two, what's really true. So let's look at an example. In this example, it's an agricultural example. They're looking at a particular hybrid of corn. So in general, this hybrid yields an average of 120 bushels per acre, with a standard deviation of 10 bushels per acre. Researchers believe that a new hybrid, which is slightly more expensive than the ones that are currently in use, produces a higher yield. So the researchers plant the corn hybrid on 50 randomly selected 1-acre plots, so on 50 acres. And on those 50 acres, they obtain an average yield of 123.6. Okay, so that would be your sample mean, bushels per acre. Can it be concluded that the new hybrid does produce a higher mean yield? For hypothesis error problems, you need to do essentially three things. First of all, you have to decide what is the null and alternative hypotheses. Secondly, you've got to then describe what are the errors in terms of the hypotheses you've listed. And lastly, you've got to talk about what are the consequences. What if you made a type 1 error? What would happen? That's not necessarily statistical, it's just common sense. If you commit a type 2 error, what would happen? So let's go through the answers for this first one. The problem says, again, the hybrid of corn, the current uses, that's currently in use, yields an average of 120 bushels per acre. We want to see if a new hybrid actually produces more. So the skeptic would say, which is the null hypothesis, the skeptic's hypothesis, is that the average amount, or mu, so mu is the average amount of yield in bushels per acre for the new hybrid on all acres. Again, that's mu is a population mean. This is not just on the 50 acres, but on all acres. What is the average yield? The skeptic would say that they're still the same. That in other words, that the mean is still 120. They want to determine if the new hybrid produces more. So the alternative is that the mean yield is actually greater than 120. So once you identify the null and alternative, then we just have to describe the type 1 and type 2 errors. So the type 1 error, and again, remember they have two parts, what you conclude and what's really true. A type 1 error, you conclude HA is true when H naught is really true. So you would conclude that the mean yield, so I'm looking at these hypotheses up there, the mean yield for the new hybrid on all acres, because it's a population, it's an inference, is more than 120 bushels per acre, HA is true, when actually the mean yield is or equals 120 bushels per acre. A type 2 error, you conclude that H naught is true when HA is really true. So you would conclude that the mean yield on all acres for the new hybrid is 120 bushels per acre. Okay, so that is the H naught is true, when actually the mean yield is more than 120 bushels per acre. So you have your hypotheses and then you describe the errors. Just tell me what you conclude, what's really true. Lastly, let's talk about the implications. What are the implications of these errors? Now remember, from the problem, these are our hypotheses, and these are the type 1 and type 2 errors from the previous slide. So what are the consequences? For type 1, you've concluded that the mean yield is greater than 120 bushels per acre. In other words, the new hybrid is more productive when actually it equals 120 bushels per acre. So actually there's no improvement over the currently used hybrids. So since it was concluded that the new hybrid was more productive, in other words, we concluded that the mean yield is greater than 120. Since it's concluded that the new hybrid is more productive than the existing ones, we would purchase and plant the new hybrid. That's what we do because we think it's more productive. However, recall from the problem, I'm going to skip back there real quick. The problem says that the new hybrid is, let's take a look at this, the new hybrid is slightly more effective. Oh, that's awful right there. There you go. There's our line. The new hybrid is slightly more expensive than the ones that are currently in use. All right, that's important. So let's go back down to the implications. So we concluded the new hybrid was more productive. So we're going to purchase and plant it. But actually, the new hybrid is no more productive. In other words, H naught is really true. So because it's actually no more productive, then the additional money that we've spent on purchasing the new hybrid would be money that's wasted. So that's an implication for a type 1 error. How about a type 2 error? Again, type 2, you conclude that the mean yield is 120 acres for the new hybrid, so in other words, there's no improvement in productivity, when actually the mean yield for the new hybrid is greater than 120 bushels per acre, or it's more productive. So, since it was concluded, again, what you concluded, there's no difference. Since it was concluded that the new hybrid is not more productive than existing ones, we will not purchase and plant it. Okay, and that's because it's more expensive. We just keep using what we would use, what we're normally using. But now you got to think, what's really true? It's actually true that the new hybrid is more productive. So since the new hybrid actually is more productive than existing ones, we would have purchased and planted the new hybrid, and we would have achieved greater productivity. For those of you in business programs, okay, think about what this is saying. The type 2 error is actually, we've lost an opportunity. We should have planted it, but we didn't. We should have planted the new hybrid. So the type 2 error is that we've lost an opportunity to achieve higher productivity and greater profit from using the new hybrid. When you lose the opportunity to make a profit in business, that's called an opportunity cost. All right, thanks so much, and I hope this helps.